Welcome to the Polish-Austrian-Italian Trialogue project. This is the third webinar within the project, and today we're going to talk about the future of work, a topic that is of interest to everyone nowadays. So we hope that you'll enjoy our discussion. And today we have a wonderful guest from speakers from three countries: Poland, Italy, and Austria. So let me present you our speakers. I will start with Professor Marta Bertolaso from campus Biomedico de Roma. Marta is Professor of Philosophy of Science and Human Development at the Faculty of Science and Technology for Humans and the Environment at University Campus Biomedico of Rome in Italy. And she works on human work and soft control in management in the light of the new technologies like AI. And she has been the scientific director of the Humans and Technology section of the website Salud Europa. Professor Bertolaso also is the editor-in-chief of the Springer series Human Perspective in Health, Science and Technology. We are very honored to have you, Professor Bertolaso. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward for your presentation about the new technologies and the future of work. And then let me welcome Professor Agnieszka Chłoń-Domińczak from Warsaw School of Economics. She's a professor at Warsaw School of Economics, and in 2008-2009, she was the Deputy Minister of Labor and Social Policy in Poland. She also served as a Vice President of Social Protection Committee of the European Council, and she was a member of the Employment, Labor and Social Policy Committee in the OECD. Professor Chłoń-Domińczak is also and was an expert within projects at OECD, the World Bank, and International Labour Organization. We're very happy to have you, and we're looking forward to listen about your comments on not only about Poland, but I hope that we'll also learn a little bit about a bigger picture about Central Eastern Europe. And then we're very, very thankful to have with us Dr. Irene Fialka from INiTS Vienna University Business Incubator. INiTS supports deep tech startups and university spin-offs, and Dr. Fialka, as a CEO, is leading the work of INiTS. Together with corporate partners, INiTS runs Health Hub Vienna, a multi-corporate accelerator for healthcare startups. So Dr. Fialka has an extensive, in-depth knowledge how the new technologies are actually being implemented both by business sector and academia. So we have a very interesting set of speakers today. Each of you, I hope, will bring an amazing in-depth knowledge about each country, about Austria, Italy, and Poland, and hopefully also this bigger picture about Central Eastern Europe. And I would like to ask Professor Bertolaso to start with the presentation on Italy.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity. And I want, first of all, to thank the Polish Academy of Science for organizing and allowing this webinar. I have a presentation, a few slides, just to help, hopefully, with images, sharing some ideas about the future of work from a specific perspective, which is, of course, very much related with my own academic field, which is philosophy of science and human development. So my focus will be mostly on the new technologies and the future of human work and some consequences for employers, employee relations, especially from the organizational viewpoint of enterprises, of course, looking from the perspective of Italy. On these topics. So the title I would like to use to introduce is already part of the main message I would like to share with you and to discuss with you, which is this one. The idea that we are actually moving from a control paradigm to a paradigm of care. This will allow me to divide more or less this 10 minutes talk in 3 parts. The first 2 are meant to introduce the topic from a perspective that probably help us to understand better what is actually going on in the transition we are living. And I'm talking of transitions because I really think that we are living in an age of great changes, and there are new challenges. And these new challenges are really informed somehow by some challenges that we were already living, in which we were already embedded in previous pandemic, so previous the COVID pandemic. Which are these challenges? Those challenges are related, in my opinion, with what we generally call digital transitions that I have represented in the following 3 slides with images, and what in literature is also called with the 3A, right? So the first one is automation. In the industrial revolutions, we have been pushing forward our technological and the innovation agendas, trying to implement the automation processes. But we have also suffered sometimes, but also enjoyed to some extent of these other phenomena, which is precisely acceleration. The third one, A, is autonomy. So we have been building a world, so a society, enterprises that are actually aiming and that actually sell autonomy through the new technologies to the different players of our society, and of course also in the organization of the enterprises. There is a fourth one, which is accessibility feature of this digital transition that is also so relevant, I think, in the current scenario we want to discuss today, or we are actually trying to understand better, to improve through our reflections, but also through our daily work in the different fields. The a final slides for this first part is dedicated to this other phenomena, I would say, in our society, in the European, especially in the American setting scenario, which is this consequence that has been discussed in many different books, literature from different sciences, so the social sciences, philosophy, organizational science, and so on, the dematerialization of the relationships. Because it's true that the previous acceleration, accessibility, automation processes have been really shaping our society also in this sense. So we were, when we entered the COVID period, we inherited somehow these kind of trends. And the question at that time, I'm speaking of 1 year ago, more or less, the question was mainly related with the role of, for example, the AI technologies for the future of work. And suddenly, with the pandemic, we have been asking how these technologies can actually help. So they stopped somehow, to some extent, to be the problem and part of the answer. But here is the problem I would like to discuss with you today, because I think that precisely because we were not able at that time to find an adequate anthropological, epistemological framework to the questions, not necessarily to the answers, of the previous challenges related with the role of the new technologies with regards with the future of work, of human work, we are like in a cul-de-sac at the moment. although I am optimistic, and I will show you some data that can help foreseeing this optimistic scenario. But we are not already out of these challenges. To give you an example, I have a couple of more slides on the second point on this inherited control paradigm that, in my opinion, emerges very well and in particular in some European documents on, for example, digital ethics, to mention one of the many documents we have been looking at in the last months. If you pay attention at the kind of language and at the kind of framework the majority of part of these documents actually use, we are using a language that is typical of mechanistic, tayloristic, hierarchical structure of our enterprises and even of our society. So artificial intelligence technologies, for example, are mainly supposed to improve these aspects: velocity and efficiency, possibility of action, control. But there is hardly any reference to a purpose, for example, to what are the ethical values, what are the principles that should drive our technological implementation. And this is also quite clear in the texts, right? And not only in the structure of these documents that still follow a procedural framework, which is for those of you that are familiar with bioethics and the main agendas in bioethics, for example, in the last century, were typically supported by the Anglo-Saxon world, so UK and US. Here you can see that the goal is to achieve, right? Is to achieve a certain function. Optimization is another typical example of a mechanistic language. So we are still thinking, although we perceive the need to move forward and to open up new scenarios and new ways of organizing enterprises, societies, and therefore also of thinking of human work, not despite the new technologies, but precisely through the new technologies, we are still linked and embedded in an old, I would say, framework and paradigm, which is precisely a functional, a mechanistic, a hierarchical one. Here you have a slide. It is probably not easy to read it, but I just wanted to highlight that this is taken from the last World Economic Forum document on the future of jobs to 2020. And at the very beginning, on the top, in Italy, you can see that in the transition, in the COVID period for enterprises in reorganizing their work, the priorities are very much related with digitalization, opportunities for work remotely, accelerate automation. So, as you can see, we are still struggling with the previous challenges and not yet, in my opinion, and in the opinion of our scholars, at least in Italy, to bridge the gap that the technologies and the pandemic have been imposing, right, somehow, or forcing us to face with in the last period. To move faster to the third and final point of my presentation, I just wanted to add I don't have time to argue in favor of this thesis, so I can only share it with you at the moment. But the idea is that we have to integrate somehow the ethical framework that is behind all those documents I have been mentioning up to now, which are very much related with the Kant perspective in ethics and on, for example, autonomy, with another perspective that can be well represented, I think, by Heidegger, and this idea that only if we are able to dwell, we will be able to build. This is a statement after the Second World War. I don't want to compare the current situation with that one, but I still think that there is a need to think of the autonomy of human beings, as also Kant highlighted, in relational terms. So this is my point. Relational aspects of human beings, of their social and professional behavior, are crucial in order to understand the current dynamics and also to find new models and new ways to organize our work. So in Italy, in concrete, there is a trend that is actually taking seriously this possibility of modelizing the new jobs, the organization of the new jobs, the organization of enterprises, and of enterprises within our society, also with the support and the help. We have had a very interesting discussion with the trade unions, for example, about this. So that relations are crucial in order to support the work of people in the enterprises, but also to foresee new models for management, for example, or to change the business models from value chain to platforms, for example, to networks, in order to create communities. But the challenge to create the communities is very different from the challenges of delivering something, which was the goal of the majority of part of enterprises in Italy. And of course, this requires to gather the different players around the same table in the value creation process. This also means and has concrete consequences, for example, in how we can think of open innovation projects of ecosystems, which is very different from the open innovation of startups, for example, at least in Italy. So let's move to the third part and the final. In a few minutes, I just want to go sometimes deeper in this paradigm of care from the point of view and regarding its relevance for the future of human work. The thesis we have defended in some publication is also that care is what essentially and most fundamentally should and can characterize more and more any kind of human work and job, precisely because of human. So it's the current challenges are actually forcing us to understand deeper and wider somehow the very concept of human work because of human. And the tension we are suffering, I think that is evident in this slide. Again, sorry, sometimes it's too small, but at the bottom of this slide, there is like a contrast between the emerging and redundant job roles and the emerging skills. Because here the question will be, at least for me as a scholar, how should we train the future generation for the future scenarios? And I will be delighted to listen to the opinions of the others around this table this evening. So on the left, you can see that the emerging jobs are still related with machine learning, Internet of Things, data analytics, etc. On the contrary, among the emerging skills, on the top you can find creativity, originality, initiative, critical thinking, active learning, resilience, emotional intelligence. Skills that are that requires from a mental process viewpoint very different skills than the kind of job that have been listed on the top of the emerging works. So I think that there is a tension. We have not yet filled the gap, but there is hope. The hope is that we are understanding much better, at least in Italy, and there are great discussion about this, that human work is very much related not only with delivering something, with functional categories, but with generating culture, with bearing a meaning. Enterprises, for example, in Italy, are working a lot on their purpose, what they call purpose, right? And the paradigm we are discussing and we are sharing with the people in Italy is what we call that an empowering presence. So human beings in their workplace, even if this place is at home, should be understood better as an empowering presence that is developed through these three dimensions. The biology dimension concerns the biological roots of the person. The by doing dimension relates to the actions a person performs, and more particularly to specific tasks linked to a role the person has in a personal and professional context. And the by holding, which is the hardest to understand but so important, is the somehow invisible network of relationships precisely that bind someone to her story and help to disclose and make one aware of her identity. I want to close just with a couple of slides. This is a graphical representation of how this model actually can work, and there are enterprises that are already investing on this. Just to give you an example, which is linguistic or of narratives, but narratives are so important. And people are saying that in Italy, at least, we have been talking about smart work instead of talking, as in many other countries in Europe and US, about home work. And there is a reason why I will be able to discuss, and probably is already evident from what I have said. So let's finish and conclude saying that the control versus care paradigm means that care should be understood as the ethical complement of our spatio-temporal ontology, but that moving from an ethical perspective and not only from a functional perspective is also helping us to put numbers, to create models, real models for new emerging management, for example, models or business model. Like this is an example that has been published, understood in terms of interfaces. We can go back to this slide in the discussion if of interest. And this is another example of the work that many enterprises have been endorsing and supporting in Italy in the last period, precisely trying to bridge collectively this gap between a framework, a situation in which we thought that human beings mainly maximize as consumers, and instead we are understanding better and better, and the COVID pandemic is a good example, is maximizing as a relational being. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to listening to the other talks.
Thank you, Professor Bertolaso, for your interesting presentation and showing us that the workplace is actually a place of our development, and there's so many opportunities ahead of us because of the situation that we are living in. I'm already very interested and curious to hear more from you, especially about the future of workforce later in the discussion. Whether you think that the future workforce will be rather based on, so to say, animal laborans, or more homo faber, as Hannah Arendt referred to this definition. And I think we cannot say really that that the COVID pandemic created this trend, because it's an old one, I would say. But I'm very interested on your opinion on this. Whether is this threat really big one currently? Can we expect the situation that people will be in such a bad situation that there will be no room for the, so to say, a noble work, so work run by causes like social mission and serving others. So thank you so much for your interesting presentation, and Professor Chłoń-Domińczak, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting introduction to our discussion that shows that the future of work is really quite different from what we observe at the moment. And I think as also the World Economic Forum report this year shown, it is really coming sooner than expected, also because of the COVID pandemic and the fact that many of the workplaces had to evolve, had to change because of the lockdowns, because of the necessity to arrange work differently, to work from home, which became, let's say, a norm for many of us who work, especially with our brains and not in essential services or in production facilities when workers are needed. So I think it's really something that is coming. I would like to add to that another perspective, which is a perspective of population change, which we also need to take into account, especially in Europe. And on the top of the fact that the way we work change, we also need to remember that the future workforce will be an older workforce. So we will have smaller labor market resources, let's say. There will be less people in ages when people usually work. And this is particularly the case of Europe. And the average age of workers will also be higher. So on the top of the fact that there are challenges related to the way the work is shaped, it is also the workers that will be having that will need to adapt to these changes, which I think is a huge challenge. As you mentioned, as Dr. Ponikowska mentioned, we are analyzing the issue of to what extent the workplaces will be computerized or partially computerized in the future, and the risks of that for countries in Europe are quite high. So some 60% of workplaces in Spain or Italy or Austria are about to be at least computer aided to some extent, and for Central and Eastern European countries this is also way above 50%. What we also see is that many workers that are working currently in jobs who are at risk of being at least partially digitalized or computerized are not really learning, so or developing their skills or changing their skills. So another challenge that we have is that we really need to think about how the current workforce can adapt to this very quickly changing environment. And especially, again, the last year has shown that these changes are coming sooner than we expected. At the same time, the participation in various lifelong learning courses, especially for those who work in those more at-risk jobs, is much lower compared to the others. So what we observe is that there's polarization. Those who work in positions that already are adopted well to the changing, to the future of work, are really developing their skills, developing their competences, adjusting to the new way the work is framed and to the smart jobs, let's say. And those who are working in those jobs that are not that adjusted, are not thinking or are not really following the path that will allow them to adjust more. So I think it is a huge challenge for many of the countries, both from the Western Europe and from the Eastern Europe, how to do that, how to get ready for the future that is really knocking to our doors.
Thank you very much, Professor Chłoń-Domińczak. I'm really curious, what do you think about the answer, that the possible answer that can be given for all these issues that you just highlighted? As I do believe that regulators are usually slower, and we cannot really expect a law to be very timely implemented and to answer very timely on the current needs, and especially when it comes to labor market, which is so closely linked with education, and there you have even you can expect even slower changes in the education law or qualifications related law. I would be very curious to hear later in discussion your thoughts on this. What should be the answer? Should third sector, so NGOs or academia, should these institutions, foundations, and scholars, should they step in and accelerate this change and the new regulations that are needed? Thank you again for your input about Poland, and we're also looking forward to hear later more about the situation in Central Europe. Thank you.
Does anybody right now reflect?
No. I hope we'll have a time in a few minutes. But I'm very thankful for all your inputs, and let's listen about the remarks on Austrian and situation in Austria, and especially I hope we'll hear more about the new technologies and how do they influence the future of labor market in Austria, and to which extent we can really expect that the automation will create a situation when some jobs will be lost, and as in this year's McKinsey Global Institute research claims that around more than 20% of jobs until 2030 will be automated. Are these predictions real, and especially for Europe and for Central Europe? Irene, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope you can hear me well. I'm really honored to be on such a high-class panel. Really humbled. Thank you very much. Well, I'm here, I think, to bring in yet another point of perspective, not only from the countryside, but also from the national differences, but also from yet another perspective in terms of innovation. And I think we all agree that innovation is really key to overcome various problems, including the work problem that we are discussing today. What we have seen, and I've started to work with INiTS in 2004, and in 2004 at the universities in Austria, at least, entrepreneurship and innovation was still, very little represented, I would say. The first research was started to be done here in Austria, and I guess in general the research in innovation, is probably one of the younger disciplines, I would call it, where people have to do still a lot needs to be done and researched. In Austria at the universities, it was still the case that the intellectual property was not owned by the universities, and the third mission of the universities was not established very well back then, which now has really changed a lot. And I think that's not so unique to Austria. It's probably pretty much the same all across Europe, I would say, at least is what I've seen. And slowly the universities are taking up in focusing resources and attention to that third mission. Besides doing research and besides educating young people to be prepared for the workforce that is needed by us, the society in the future, really take care of the innovative solutions that are being researched on, really get back to the society in the form of innovative products and services. And I think we are lagging behind in that aspect if we compare it to the Anglo-American region, in particular the United States. The third mission as one task of the universities was put down in Bayh-Dole Act in the 80s, and in Austria at least, and I didn't see it much earlier in other countries in Europe. It was established later, so we're lagging behind. Still, what in general in Europe and in Austria in particular, there's a lot of amazing research being done, and we're pushing forward in really translating this into innovation. But there we have to look at what innovation really means. Innovation means that there is a new product or a new technology being successfully launched onto a market. And what I need to do that is not only generate something that works, so really solve the technological issues, but we also need to look at the demand side. And I use, again, COVID-19 crisis as one example where we have seen that a lot. For instance, in the digitalization of healthcare, Europe has been lagging behind and still is lagging behind in general. If it comes to really, driving this forward, no matter whether it's measuring data of patients or whether it's personalized medicine or whether it's telemedicine, is not as well established in Europe as compared to other countries. Yet technologically, it was not the question at all. We could have the technologies ready. On the technology side, basically the problems have been solved. Yet what was lagging behind was the demand side. The people in Europe were not as open to telemedical solutions as they, for instance, are in Asia or in the United States. Yet the crisis just pushed that demand side, increasing the likelihood that new technologies really come to markets and can serve the population as innovations, because now demand really is there, and now the technologies that can solve the problems really can be bought, and they can be sold. And I think that's a good example of where both needs to be there. Yeah, first, solving the ability of technologies to solve these issues, but on the other hand, also the market to be open to use those new technologies, to put them into place in their processes, etc. And I think that's something that was driven massively by the COVID crisis, because all of a sudden we simply needed to use those tools. There was no other way. We had to stay at home. Of course, there are people who have jobs that cannot work at home, but a lot of us all of a sudden realized, oops, it's not that, it's not that bad. We can do that. We were forced to adopt super speed to something that was out there in a long time, and it kind of changed the usual S-curve adoption of new technologies in a very, very short period of time. So the adoption curve was very, very steep. And I think this is something that we need to be aware of, that we will not go back to the old, how we did it in the past, before the crisis. We will, we have learned what kinds of tools and instruments are useful for us as a workforce, as a society, where we can, shortcut processes that we have done in a completely inefficient way before the crisis, to make them more efficient by using such tools that are available out there. And some other things that we were happy to go back to as social animals. We need to interact, and I think that's something that will still take a while to get back to that, but we will always starving for human interaction. And so that there are things that we will pick up again and others we will have changed. And I think that's something that everybody, no matter with children nor elderly, everybody needs to be aware of the fact that it's not going to be like before. And this needs to, I mean, all over Europe, we learned that we are lacking talent in a certain domain. We are lacking talent in everything that has to do with artificial intelligence, digitalization, etc. As a society, we were not prepared for that, to really train a lot of people in that aspect. And I think it's not enough, and it cannot be put down onto the universities to train all those people, and it cannot be only the young, but it must also be the more experienced, the elderly people who need to train that in order to really keep up to that change, and adopt and keep their jobs. One aspect maybe on top of that, innovation is always something new in an old environment, or something old in a new environment, or something new in a new environment. What it's always a combination of, on the one side, experience, because you named before regulatory affairs. Usually there are a lot of people who are very experienced in that aspect, but experience is not only a guarantee for success, it can also be an inhibitor of innovation, because experience just means that we used to do it like that, and this is my experience is it works like that, and innovation is quite the opposite, doing things differently. And I think that's maybe what we need to learn as a workforce. Yeah, how do we combine the way experienced people do things, and have been doing it in a long time, and having had good results with that, with the way of younger people would do it completely differently, and not lose one nor the other, because we need the driving force of the people who think in a different way and see solutions that us as experienced people maybe don't even see and think of. Plus, on the other side, we cannot just skip all the experience, because it is also supposed to protect us as a society and as a workforce. Regulatory affairs just being one of them, but also, having an eye on organizational issues, etc. So I think that ambidextry that was named before in the first presentation also is something that all of us will need to learn. Trusting the experienced people, but also questioning experienced people, and the opposite way around, trusting the young and questioning the young, and both at the same time to really move forward.
Thank you so much, Irene. Thank you. Your comments about the third mission of the university were very, very, very interesting, and I'm just wondering how universities can help with overcoming labor market mismatches that are highlighted in almost every report and academic article about the future of work. This skills gap, how the third mission of university can be developed, or do we need a fourth mission of university? Do we need to create a quite new mission of the university, something that they were not doing really before, that was not really common for academia before? And I will be also very curious to hear your thoughts later in discussion about the company of the future, because you have such an amazing experience with so many startups and young people and businesses from so many sectors, and people from academia who are trying to bring their ideas into the business sector. I'm just wondering what's your prediction on the future company and organization within the company? How these things will work with the home office and the employee-employer relations, and also developing personal goals at work, and also being of help for other colleagues, which is not always so easy when you do home office and you cannot really see each other face to face, as you mentioned, that for everybody is a quite new situation. Also trying to balance it with the work, trying to balance work with the life, as for so many of us now, work and private life is mixed and it's happening at the very same space. So we need to somehow redefine both first and adjust to this new situation. So I'll be very happy to hear more from you about this new mission of the university and the new company's organizational structure within, and also dealing with these work-life balance issues. But coming back to Professor Marta Bertolaso and the question, the question about the future of workforce, and whether it will be full of homo faber or full of people who are working only to survive in a way, which would be obviously not something that our societies are looking for. And can you also please deepen a little bit and go back to your presentation maybe and tell us more about this shift from the paradigm of control to paradigm of care? And I think that for many companies and employee-employers relations, it may be something quite new. Yes, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, you all. Actually, it has been great and really helpful listening to the other presentation. Okay, I'll try to be very to give you short answers, not to take your time, but let's see. To the first question, my answer would be that when we think of homo faber, we usually think that techniques and technology, more in general, is something that is added to our human nature, right? And something that we can take on or leave aside depending on our necessity or needs. So I think that we have to go back to some, I think, evident and commonly acknowledged aspects of human beings, which is that humans have been always been technical beings. It's not something added to our nature. So we live and we behave in the real world through technology, through technique, through any kind of solution we will foresee, any kind of scenario at some point will ask from each one of us and from us collectively to improve some technological tools. It has been always like that. So I think the real problem for me, I would like to reframe the question somehow, saying that probably we have to avoid that countries, nations, and different areas in the world will be obliged because of urgencies that are imposed by the pandemic and sometimes to other dynamics too, to behave and to live only within a scenario of survival. If there are philosophers, contemporary philosophers, that have been explaining this point very well. When human beings are forced to think only of their to survive, they will fail even in this attempt. Because human beings are not just for survival, right? We don't want just to survive something. We need social, professional, and ethical values. So that's my answer. I think that if we are able to move to to go beyond the current situation of urgency, which is something urgent. Talking about urgency, which is urgent, in my opinion, we will see something new coming up. Not only because of the need to survive, but especially driven by social, professional, and ethical values. So homo faber is the condition, is not the final goal, I would say, right? And we have to avoid it to keep human beings in a state of urgency, struggling only for survivance. And to the second question, well, it's a whole thesis, right? So it's not easy in a few minutes, but I think that to understand it, or at least to develop, to develop some interest for this new paradigm, the easiest way is to look at studies and empirical evidences, for example, in macroeconomics, that show that many problems, social problems, economic problems, even at the market level, can be solved not investing on classical, traditional economic categories, but using and investing on relational categories. What I mean with these relational categories is, for example, that if we need to solve a problem among generations or problems of safety, for example, when people have to move from one part of the city to another one and they cannot, because they cannot use the public transport and so on, right? There are very nice studies showing that if we invest, for example, on intergenerational relationships, on dynamics of not only subsidiarity, but of solidarity among people in the same areas of the city, you get much closer to very good solutions to solving the problem than investing, for example, on more transport or more policemen around. So this is just to give you a short answer, and yeah, sometimes let's go back to some points if we will have time afterwards.
Thank you, Professor Bertolaso. You mentioned solidarity, which is a link to this aging society and the issue of aging that Professor Chłoń-Domińczak mentioned before. So it's really it's a very interesting and good point that we cannot really look only from the perspective of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also when talking about the future of workforce and the future of work, we should also take under consideration that the situation in Europe is changing when it comes to aging, and it's really also very crucial, important factor for the labor policy and the possible new regulations for the labor market. Professor Chłoń-Domińczak, can we go back to this issue of aging society, and also possibly to issue of qualification systems and how education maybe can be a part of the solutions for the I don't want to call it the problems and issues that we all see when it comes to the future of work.
Yes, I think the crucial issue is that both education systems need to prepare students to lifelong learning. So we learn all the time in very different contexts, informally, when we would just want to acquire new skills. We also learn in this multi-generational framework from our children, very frequently when, I don't know how to do a certain thing, I can ask my children who are much more skilled in IT than I am. But I think it's really something that happens, is that the generations have different experiences, different perspectives. Young people are much better in technologies. Older people are better in their experience and very frequently also social relations. So the issue is how to use this intergenerational mix in order to adapt to the changing environments. And
yes, but do you think that the answer should come from the regulators and from the policymakers, or should we as members of academia or people from the NGOs, should we step in?
Everybody should step in. So it's not something that can be done solely by the government and the education systems. Let me paraphrase Professor Marciniak, who was who was behind many of the reforms in Poland in the education system. He once said that, you know, education system is like a big truck. So it's very difficult to move in, and it's very difficult to stop. So definitely education systems need to adjust, and the way the curricula are shaped, the way the qualifications frameworks and qualification systems are shaped, it is very important to embedding them, the building the competence of lifelong learning. So this is something that we should already teach young people, that it's not, you don't end your education when you leave the school or when you leave the university. It's something that stays with you all the time. And I think there's also a huge role for universities, for different educational institutions, but also training centers, also non-governmental organizations, to really move people to learn. And that's something that we need to really repeat like a mantra, that we need to learn all the time, also adults. And it's not something that, you know, is very, let's say, I mean, it's not a shame if we enroll into a course and learn new things. And it's not a weakness, it's actually strength. And we need to do that all the time. So I think it's really important to join the forces, and it's not the only regulator or educational institutions or society or social partners or NGOs. We should all agree that we need to invest in skills, we need to invest in developing the competences, we need to see that also in intergenerational framework and see that we can learn, different generations can learn from each other. That, you know, generation 50 plus is not, maybe doesn't have this kind of skills as the young people, but they also have their experiences and something that they can share with the young, as far as, I don't know, the work ethics, the approach to jobs, which is completely different. So I think that there's a lot that can be done between generations, and we really have to create virtuous circles in order to cope with the challenges, be it the future of work, the globalization, the new technologies that appear all the time, and population aging. These are all global trends that we need to adapt to. We cannot really change them or reverse them. So it's really important that such a joint effort is made.
Thank you so much for your comments. And again, Professor Chłoń-Domińczak just mentioned again the role of the university, and we just had some days ago a webinar on the future of universities, and Professor Luciano Sasso from La Sapienza Roma, from the network of the universities of capitals of Europe, he also emphasized that there is a really a big work to be done by universities, and also he showed us lots of good outcomes and good effect that we can see because of this situation. So not only all the negative outcomes, but coming back to the university mission and the future of workforce. Irene, can you tell us more? How does it work in practice in Vienna, in Austria, at your office, and how this mission is deepened and developed, and how does it look like in action?
Well, I agree with what was said before. It's not only the universities who have to do the training. Not everybody studies at the university. Quite the opposite. It's only a smaller part of the population who has the opportunity and the possibility to study at the university and learn from university professors. I think what the universities do, they train the trainers, I think. So usually if you become a teacher, no matter what level, you go to one kind of university. And I think that's one task that the university definitely has. Yet training is not the only task that the university has to accomplish. They also have to be a driving force in knowledge. And knowledge is the basis for acquiring new terrain if it comes to new technologies, for instance. And there I disagree a little bit with what was said before. All the problems that are out there, a survival mode. Sometimes, if it's only survival, of course, that's limiting. On the other hand, crisis has always been a time of entrepreneurship and innovation. It's a driving force, in fact. If we all are very happy in how things work, and if there is no urge to change anything, so we stop developing, kind of. And it's in fact, change is the only stable constant that we have. The world has always changed, and we always move on. I think that's one of the characteristics of human beings, that we drive on, we try different things, we are curious, we are creative, and a crisis situation just means there are a lot of problems that want and can be solved. And I think that's very important. Of course, there are a lot of people who are really in bad situations right now, and they lost their jobs. But also there are plenty of studies that have proven that a high unemployment rate goes along with a high entrepreneurial and company incorporation rate. So usually it's the problem that comes first, and then comes the innovation, because the problems need to be solved, and there are people out there who are driven by that, who realize the problem, and who are creative enough to generate solutions to those problems. And we have seen that during the health crisis that we just had, and we have seen it during the employment crisis that we are in the middle in. And I think that's something that is inspiring. On the other hand, it releases a lot of power of creativity to create more innovation, and thereby again more jobs. They might look different, those jobs. They're asking for different skills. But again, the human brain is very flexible, and we can adopt very quickly. And if there is need, we can do that, and we can do amazing things. Our brains can adopt to even, there were experiments where people wear glasses that turned the entire world upside down. The first few steps and the first few days are very difficult to walk, but then the human brain can turn the picture around, so to speak, within a very short period of time, and people are able to walk with those glasses which turn the entire picture, so to speak, around. And I think that's something what the human beings are really all about. Our brains are amazingly powerful, and crisis and lack of resources just make us more inventive and more creative, and thereby we again generate more jobs for others who might not be as creative as some of us, the entrepreneurs. And I think that's what makes the world go round. Coming to the training again, I think what we will see in the future is this has not only be a health crisis and not only be an employment crisis, it's also going to be an education crisis. We see in Austria, and I'm pretty sure it's everywhere else too, the kids, if you look at the closing down of schools, not only was the system not prepared to cover all up, but there has been a lot of separation of those who are better equipped, and this means in language, it means in computer. There were pupils who didn't even have a computer at home, and there were 3 kids maybe in one household that had to use the computer of their mom or dad, if there was one, and otherwise they couldn't do anything. So I think what we are going to see is an education crisis to come, and the damage that that crisis has generated in that very young generations. We will see that only later. But again, I think we will all learn from it. We will. There is plenty of room also for studying all those things scientifically and being prepared in a better way the next time. And I hope this is the biggest learning that we have to take along. Yeah, we learned that we were unprepared. We will be better prepared next time, but the next problem might come that we're again not prepared for, and we will again learn from it and drive on and move on as a society.
Thank you, Irene, for this insight, and actually very optimistic and highlighting and emphasizing the real nature of a human being and all the potential that we have within us. And with this question, I would like to go back. With this comment, I'd like to go back to Professor Bertolaso and her presentation. And Irene has just mentioned that we will observe creating new jobs, and and people who have this entrepreneurship spirit and skills, that they will create jobs for those who maybe don't have this possibility and they're not so innovative to come up with so quick with the new solutions. And Professor Bertolaso, can you tell us a little bit about the new skills, competences, new jobs? What's your opinion on this? Which kind of new jobs and new competences we will see and we will observe in the near future?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the last comment. I completely agree, and I think that the two perspectives are not in contrast. On the contrary, because I think he's talking about the effort of surviving and the other of values, right? And in fact, the example we are sharing are precisely related with the social values. So moving forward as a society. So that's I think. At least in my opinion, the most important aspect of what is actually going on, because we are already experiencing that in innovation processes or in new levels of organization, and also gathering the different players you have been mentioning. So coming to the question, I think that well, not I think. Let me move from data, right? The kind of data we are looking in that report, the World Economic Forum report, the last one, when they come to Italy, they highlight something we already see in the real scenario, and we were discussing last week with CEOs of important enterprises, creativity, analytical thinking, critical thinking, capabilities of analysis, resilience, stress tolerance, flexibility, emotional intelligence are listed among the first skills and the emerging skills we should train people in. The challenge is, one challenge at least, is having the CEOs, the C-levels, the HR people skilled to skill people in these skills. Somebody, I don't remember now who was mentioning, but I think it was crucial, right? Saying that in the universities, we are training the trainees, and the HR people, CEO levels, right, are crucial in understanding the kind of processes that are going on. They want to be there in the enterprise to guarantee that the production process will fulfill. But they have to guarantee that people are really working and behaving and they are happy. So, and it's not only a problem of welfare policies, it's a problem of organization, and it's a problem of understanding the workplaces, in my opinion, in a very different way. We can work from home, but we have to work for a common goal, for a common achievement. We are part of an enterprise. So sometimes we have to rethink, to reconsider, also from an anthropological, social, philosophical point of view, the very notion of human enterprise. What is supposed to realize in the real world? What kind of innovations should we expect from it? And these kind of questions are new to some extent, even for the CEOs or the HR people in the enterprises. They were not trained for this kind of to give answers. So motivation, for example, the capability to give new motivations, to share motivations among the same players, among the employees, among the managers, or among the CEOs of different enterprises, because they have to take over, like in Italy, a challenge which belongs to the country as a country. So not because of a specific aspect of a specific area, right, in Italy. Anyway, yeah, I think that this would be part of my answer, to give you a couple of concrete examples I have been looking at and discussing with people here in Italy last week.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bertolaso. Professor Chłoń-Domińczak, can you tell us more about the situation in Poland? Is it just the same, exactly the same skills and competences set? Can we say that actually it's a common for entire Europe, this skill set that is needed? And also, can you tell us about the development of inequalities? What's your opinion on the impact of the current COVID-19 pandemic on the inequalities at the labor market, and possibly also if you see any changes between the situation of men and women at the labor market currently? Does the current situation accelerate any of the old problems, or deepen them, or bring more light into what we actually observed before?
Yes, I think, I mean, the kinds of skills that are needed are more or less converging in Europe. We definitely, I mean, of course, I mean, if we look at the productivity of people in let's say Central and Eastern Europe, probably it's lower still. And we, of course, see differences in wage levels, but these skills that are needed in the future will be needed, I think, in all the labor markets across Europe and worldwide as well. So this is a global trend. With the COVID, I think there are several challenges that I would like to mention. One is the future generations, or the issue what happens with education systems, and the school closures which were related to lockdown that were frequently adopted in Europe, that they definitely add on into inequalities, because there are many problems that students have with with having an equipment, accessing the online teaching, and also time devoted to learning is different. And we also see that those that come from better socioeconomic background have more support from their parents compared to those that are from the poorer socioeconomic background. And again, this is something that is happening all over. So it's not only the issue of Eastern Europe, it's spread all over. So the OECD is pointing out that we can have a problem in the future. Some estimates of Professor Hanuszek and Professor Bosman show that the future labor income of cohorts that are affected by those educational school closures can be lower by 3%, and that can also translate into the lower economic growth. So this is something that is challenging. And for the women, it's also the case because, as for example mentioned by Gosta Spink-Andersen, we have this issue of incomplete revolution. So while women gain more and more equality on the labor market, which is still not fully equal. So we observe gaps in both employment levels and wage levels, but also there's the issue of how the work is divided at home. And with the COVID pandemic, again, with the school closures, with the closure of the childcare institutions, we see that this division of work shifted more towards women. And women are also working in many of the jobs that are directly and that are essential, like services, medical sector, again, education and care. There's lots of things that that are sort of taking the achievements that we had, especially in the education systems, in the gender equality backwards because of the pandemic. So we will need to work twice as hard to equalize those differences in the future.
Thank you for your comments. Irene, Dr. Fialka, can you tell us about your prediction on the future companies, how they can look like inside, how are employees and employers going to be happy people? Are they going to live with a work-life balance, or is this home office mode going to stay with us for longer, or how do you see the company of the future when it comes to inside organization?
Well, there's many different aspects, I think, that I would like to point out. One thing, yes, home working is gonna stay. I think many of us still need to even more so create that distance between work and family and private life. I think that's even more difficult when you do home working, because the borders, they just, blur in between, and you really have to be very, very strict in not letting these borders go whatsoever. So I think most of us will do part of home working, which is also good for the environment, because we don't need to travel back and forth all the time. There will be more interaction. We'll even cross. Now we are sitting in completely different places. We're still discussing with each other, and people everywhere in the world can listen to us very easily. So all this also has some benefits, and I think what we will we have to make sure that we take along the benefits of these possibilities that we have created and now tested, all of us, in a very emergency kind of way, but still we were able to learn and test it. Definitely we will see also organizational changes. So really there is new models, there is innovation also in organizational structures. We will move further away from pure management of companies to leadership of companies. That motivation of the staff, where does it come from? If the leader of the organization, however small or big it is, really brings across this common mission that everybody is looking out to and can follow to. And I think that's only the change on the leadership level. But if you look, for instance, one of the most important European startups or most well-known startups, Skype, was founded by people who were working in 3 different countries. So they built their entire business working, really meeting each other rather seldom, and working remotely with each other. So I think there is ways that probably are easier if you are in the IT business, because people are, they are used to remote control my computer, my IT stuff. They if I have an IT problem, he doesn't even come to me. He did not come to me always before the crisis. So there is no need. Our devices at home are being remote controlled. So I think maybe it's just that domain that is a little bit further advanced, but I'm sure it will be in every domain, that there are things that's going to be changed. And we also organizational wise, not only at the top level, but also within the organization, we will move from hierarchical structures of organizations more to matrix structures, even further to what we call holacracy. So completely different organizations. People, again, in IT, they would say, yes, this is what we have done as Scrum Masters, have learned how things work. So I think also in the organization, we will have change in terms of who do I report to. In the furthest advanced companies, tasks are being divided into small task forces, where it's not always the CEO of the company who is being reported to, but it might be that the group leader can be somebody completely different. I think what we also will see is empowering people more in terms of what they are really good at. We move from studying, one and the same alumnus of a university, no matter, there will be a greater variety of skills that people can acquire, which is needed, in fact. I mean, it's not a task force of soldiers that move all at the same speed and the same pace and do all the same things. But what we will focus on is more the personal skills of each and every one of us, and really leverage these skills. There is even measures. Yeah, you can measure how much a person is in a flow or not in a flow when they're doing whatever they're doing. Yeah, no matter, there are people who just love to do Excel sheets, and others they just love to give presentations, and others that just love to do, talk to people, touch people, or help people remote controlling their computers. So I think this is there's that the great diversity that we have as human beings, I think will be leveraged more and more in the future, and people find their own. Basically, there will be no more single job that looks like the other, but we will, the personalization, let's call it like that, is probably also gonna be there if it comes to working in a company. And startups, there will always be people who make the change and who are at the forefront of trying things the first time, and then there is early adopters that will follow and see, oh, it works well, and then there's the great majority, and then there is the laggards that have difficulties in changing and doing things differently. But I think what we need to see is the renewal of those processes that we have had in the past is inevitable, and we need to go along with that. I would like to add a word of caution also, because we have been talking about artificial intelligence will kick in, etc., to take over and automate a lot of tasks that we are now doing manually. I think in particular, because artificial intelligence, a lot of it really is based on statistics, and I come back to those biases, and gender bias is just only one of them. But there has been a lot of trouble with our AI also due to the fact that you need a lot of data to train the AI, and in the past, the data that can be used today, a lot of them have some bias. And what the AI then does is just, petrify this bias. Let's call it back. So what we need to watch out for is that diversity is also reflected in the basis for training, for doing that automation process and making and pushing forward. And there's, in particular in HR, for instance, there has been AI that was, always giving women the lower quality jobs and male proposing the higher quality jobs. So there has been a lot of that out there, or pattern recognition, face recognition. It was awfully bad in people with color as compared to people with a white skin, and they're better in recognizing this or that. And I think that's something that we definitely need to watch out for in order to really keep our ethical standards and really create opportunities for everybody as we are. And I also see that gender gap has grown worse in the past, which always happens during crisis situations, because people tend to fall back into old patterns. And the women taking care of the kids and the homeschooling is just one of them, but there is others too. And I think there we just need to counteract, very consciously counteract, and create awareness for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fialka. When it comes to it was very interesting, and you touched, you talked about so many issues, from organizing a company through inequalities and education, universities, and also I'm very happy to hear from you that in your opinion it will be possible in the future still to realize our personal goals at the workplace, and that you see it as a chance and as a possibility for the future. And you talked about the counteraction, and so as I see that unfortunately we need to we came to the end of our webinar, but before I cordially thank you for the participation in our event, I would like to ask you for your two ideas, predictions, or that policymakers or regulators could possibly use while developing a new framework for the labor market and for the employees relations. What this would be? One, two, or three advices that you would give a regulator or policymaker.
Should I start?
Yes, please,
okay.
Please, Professor Bertolaso. Yes.
Okay, I think two words. One is definitely solidarity, and the other one probably would be taking seriously intergenerational relationships in terms of experience. Somebody mentioned it, but also in terms of possibilities of getting to a much more personalized training and work place organization.
Thank you.
Maybe I can take take it on. I think we are not allowed to leave the potential that is in every single person, no matter whether it's a female person or any other discriminated people with inabilities, for instance. They all have skills, and I think as a society on the one hand, but also as an economy, we simply must not leave this behind. And I think that's a huge potential that is still ahead of us. I give you one example, for instance. There are studies, Diana Project has been doing research on female entrepreneurship since decades. And there is several studies having proven that startups that were incorporated by females and males, so the diversity is really a driving force, are much more successful. Still, most of the venture capital goes into male-only teams. And that's really an economic disaster, I would even say. So we need to learn how to lift that potential, how to recognize early the skills and ability of every single human being, and train them and support them in further developing that, and using that in the end in order to drive welfare for all of us.
Thank you.
So let me add to that the need to lifelong learn, so learn throughout lives, and important to highlight that from the beginning when we, in the education systems, but also amongst adults. And the other thing that I think is important is diversity, be it age diversity or gender diversity, that we need to benefit from diversity and we should treat it as a strength.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we have this point: solidarity, intergenerational cooperation, recognizing potential and skills of others, and lifelong learning, and equality. And I thank you so much for this discussion, and hope that we created this atmosphere of exchange between three countries. But actually, we see how similar in regard to many issues our approaches, and I hope that we can further stay in touch, discussing the future of work and observing how policy and law on the labor market and education will develop. Thank you so much. We're very honored to have you as a Polish Academy of Science Scientific Center in Vienna, and we invite all our listeners for the next webinar, which will take place on 16th December, later next week. Thank you so much.